What's up, everybody? Welcome to Heresy Financial. My name is Joe Brown, and today we're going to look at two recent announcements by two large companies, Disney and Apple, and how the announcements that they made and the moves that they're taking, the direction that they're taking their companies, speak more to the fact that they believe that long-tailed businesses are really the way of the future, and that we're nowhere near the end of this cycle. We're at the beginning of a giant decades-long shift from fat-tailed businesses to long, thin-tailed businesses. Now, this has implications ranging across the board, from your own employment, your job, your business, your investing, your wealth creation, and then even just the way that you consume products, goods, services, and entertainment. Ready? Let's dive in. All right, so a quick primer on what a fat tail versus a long thin tail is. Basically, most things in life are governed by a skewed distribution or a power distribution or a Pareto distribution. I've talked about this many times on my channel before. 10% of the galaxies in the universe have 90% of all the mass. 10% of cities have 90% of population. 10% of people have 90% of the wealth. This is something that is kind of a sort of like a law of nature that's built into the way that things operate. Now, that's one of the reasons why socialism and redistribution of wealth doesn't work, because ultimately the way that kind of nature is designed in ways other than just wealth, deeper than that, is that money and wealth drifts back down towards a few. It consolidates in the hands of a few, just like other things in nature. This happens with music, right? We've got, probably about 2 or 3% of all of the artists make all of the music that's ever listened to, and that scales down as well, right? So when you think of classical music, all classical music that's listened to basically has been made by, 4 or 5 artists. You've got your Bach, your Mozart, and I don't know who the other ones are. I'm not a big classical music fan, but you get the point. And even within that, most of the music by Mozart and Bach and Tchaikovsky and Chopin, or whoever are the big classical music names, most of their music even is not listened to. Most of the music that's listened to by them is just a small percentage, maybe 5 to 10% of their songs. This happens with sports, right? 2 or 3% of all of the athletes ever, make it to the point where they're making, 95% of all the money that is made in sports. And this is why people say, because this applies to business and products as well, so this is why people say it's not the best product that wins, it's the best known product. That's why marketing is a big deal, because there's technically somebody out there probably has a better phone made than an iPhone, but they're not winning. iPhone is winning because it's the best known product. There are probably shoe companies out there that make better shoes than Nike, but it's not the best product that wins, it's the best known product. And so that's why they take so much of the market share, is just because it consolidates that way. So this is the traditional form of business. Try and find a product that will appeal to 90 to 95% of the population. And so businesses are built on that, because that's kind of the way that things normally skew. And so when, traditionally you had bookstores, they would only carry, 5% of the books that were even published, let alone authored without being published, because only that small percent would appeal to the masses. And so as, Barnes and Noble, you're not going to carry a book on your shelf that only one person out of a million is going to want. You're going to want to carry a lot of the books that 900,000 out of the million will want, right? So that way you can actually have a business and sell things. And so most traditional stores, because there's a cost to storage, they've got a fat tail business. So they sell products that a few products that appeal to the most of people, 95% of people. Now, this leaves out products, right? And this leaves out a lot of products. Considering books, there are a lot of books that are written that 1, 2, 3, 100, maybe 1,000 people would really, really want to buy, but there is no distribution avenue to be able to purchase those things. There are a few songs that are written by a few people that maybe a couple hundred or a couple thousand people would want to listen to, but there's no distribution model for that until we get the internet. Now, the internet is changing things things still, and a lot of people think that they've missed the boat on the changes that the internet is bringing, but the moves by Apple and Disney show that this is really, we're at the beginning of these, massive societal changes, not at the end of it. And so Amazon was one of the early adopters of addressing the thin tail, the products that were left out, the 90% of products that were ever made that didn't apply to, the wants and needs of the majority. But there's, a majority of the products that will apply, that will be wanted by a minority of people. And so what they started to do was they started with books. And so they'd sell these books, and they knew that every book that they sold on their website might only sell 1 or 2 or 3 times, but they had a much lower storage cost for those books, because they didn't need prime real estate on, the main corners. They have warehouses that are far away. And so their storage costs are a lot lower. And so they could appeal to the masses. They could appeal to that thin, long tail, where instead of having the fat center of the distribution, where you've got 5% of products that 90% of people want, you have 90% of products that each one only 1 or 2 or 3% of people want. And then obviously this has started to come across in many industries, right? So think of like shirts. Like I sell my merch in the shelf below. This is not something, I didn't have to go to a shirt printer and say, minimum order size of, 1 million shirts, like something like, JCPenney or Dillard's would have had to do in the past. I didn't have to put in any sort of an order. All I did was I took a design, I uploaded it, and then whenever somebody clicks on one of my shirts in the shelf below or in the description and they purchase one, it just sends to a shirt printer. It says, hey, this is somebody who bought this shirt. Here's their address, and here's the design of the shirt that they want. And the company then prints that shirt at that moment. It's called print on demand. They print it at that moment and ship it to whoever bought it. So the storage cost of a lot of even physical product businesses are zero. I can upload hundreds of designs. I can make as many shirts as I want with zero cost. And that way, if companies do this, where they have shirts that say, they're selling shirts that say, hey, my name is Mark and my birthday is on January 1st. There's only one person in the world who might buy that shirt, but it costs them zero to store that. And then if it gets bought, then that's, an infinite return, zero cost of, zero marginal cost of storage. And then, there's, zero cost plus an income on top of that technically equals an infinite return. And so by setting up businesses where you have hundreds of thousands or millions of products that only each address 1 or 2% of people's needs, allows you, when you have a low marginal cost of storage, allows you to sell to the long, thin tail. Now, you're probably thinking, how in the world does this apply to Disney and Apple, and what are they doing to wag this long tail? Well, a few days ago, Disney announced that they have completely done a giant reorganization of their company. And the main point of this is to lean much more heavily on streaming. They're kind of separating the content creation from content distribution, which will allow them as a company to say, hey, creators, create the type of content that is going to be good content, and then we'll worry about how we get it out, and we're probably going to lean a lot more heavily on streaming. Now, why is this important? Movie theaters are fat-tailed businesses. They're the couple 3, 4, 5% of products ever made, probably even less than that, probably 1 or 2% of movies made will ever make it to a movie theater. And of the ones that make it to the movie theater, most of those are never, going to be watched. They're never going to make money. And so the movie industry, the entertainment industry, has been built on trying to, make a lot of content that, some of it will get, into the movie theaters, and then of that, some of that will, go off and it'll be watched by everybody. So movie theaters, they have a vested interest to make sure they're only accepting, movies coming in through their doors that most people will want to see, because they have a huge cost in order to put up that movie in their theater. They have to staff people, they have to keep the lights on, they have to run the projectors, they have to keep the food. There's massive costs involved with that. And so if they have movies in there that will only apply to 1% of the population, they're going to go out of business quick. And so they want blockbusters. This is part of the reason why movie companies in Hollywood have focused so heavily on sequels and movie universes and worlds recently. If you think back to like the 90s, sequels were never made, and if they were, they just went straight to VHS. Whereas today, pretty much, a huge percentage, it's just been on, a huge skyrocket as time goes on, how many movies are sequels or part of a universe, because movie companies are, realizing that they don't have the opportunity to explore as much. They would rather place their bets on something that is for sure. Now, as a side note, that shows that Hollywood and the movie and the entertainment industry realizes that it's at the end of its kind of cycle, or it's at the end of its lifetime there in the way that it currently operates, because of something called the explore versus exploit pattern. And so think of like when you're looking for a house. If you're looking for a house, at first, if you're going to buy a house, you're going to look at one, then two, then this third one, then the fourth one, then the fifth one, and on and on. And probably by the time you get to like the 11th one or the 12th one, you're going to realize, hey, the last 7 through 12 haven't really shown me anything that I really liked, especially compared to number 5. I really liked number 5. So what you're going to do after you've seen number 12, you're going to go back and look at number 5, and then you might look at number 13 and number 14, and then you're going to be like, man, but that I really like that number 9 as well. So then you'll go look at number 9, and then you'll look at like 16 and 17, and then you'll go look at 5 again, and then 9 again, and then maybe you look at one more, like 18, and then you're like, there's no more purpose for me to continue looking at houses because nothing that I'm seeing is as good as what I saw in 5 and 9. So you'll go visit those two, maybe 2 or 3 more times, and then you'll settle on either number 5 or number 9, and then you'll stay in that house because you bought it, right? And so this is the explore versus exploit patterns show when something believes it's at the beginning stages of something versus the end stages of something. Young people will tend to travel more and experience more and do more, try more new experiences, more adventures, try new foods, go new places, and especially compared to older people traditionally, because if you're 20 years old, you think, oh, I've got the rest of my life to settle into a habit. Why not try as many things as I possibly can right now, and then I can find what I really like. But if you're 85 years old, I spent 80 years trying things on earth. I know what I like and I know what I don't like, and I've only got 5 to 15 years left. So why not spend that time doing the things that I know for sure that I like, that I know for sure will work, instead of just risking it on something that I might not like. I've tried a lot of things already. And so the movie industry is showing right now that it knows it's kind of at the end of its life, because it's no longer putting in money to exploring new things that might take off. It's putting a lot of their resources into exploiting the things that it knows will pay off. And that's an indication that it believes it's at the end of its life cycle. That's a little bit of a tangent, but it translates into what Disney is doing. They're moving away from the fat-tailed business model. They're not leaning as heavily on theaters anymore because they understand that there is a much larger audience, 90% of people, who each want, each one of those percent want content that's different than everybody. They can't address that through the traditional fat tail model. They have to look at that through the long thin tail now. And so this is what people get wrong about streaming services. A lot of people, harp on, Amazon Prime or Hulu or Netflix and say, yeah, but they only have a couple good blockbuster, shows or movies. Most of what they have on there is complete garbage. That's the point. If you think most of what they have on there is hot garbage, that means everybody else does too, but everybody else has their own individual preferences on some of what you think is garbage, I think is great. And some of what I think is garbage, you think is great. And so a platform that allows exploration of creating a lot of new content allows you to address the long thin tail, where you address a much larger market. Instead of just having a few things that most people will like, you have a lot of things that a few people will like each. There's actually a much larger business potential addressing the long tail. This is why services like YouTube do so well. They're long-tailed businesses. You've got millions of creators on YouTube, and very few of them address, the content that most people will want. Most channels on YouTube are relatively small versus the size of all of YouTube, and it's a ton of, channels that are producing content that only a small percent of people will enjoy. And so I fully expect Disney to start producing more and more content that more and more people will start to say, this is hot garbage. Disney's not good at streaming. And that short term will be bad for Disney from an investor standpoint. Their stock will probably take a hit from, over the next couple of years as they transition to more of a fat-tailed model, or thin-tail, which is what it looks like they're doing right now. But long term, that's actually good because it will show that they are creating content that appeals to the majority of people, their individual wants and needs, similar to how Amazon Prime and Hulu and Netflix has a ton of content that people say is just garbage. That's addressing more people's actual wants rather than just creating a few products that most people will kind of want. Okay, so we know that's what Disney is doing, and they're showing, hey, we know this is the way the internet is changing things and moving forward, so we want to evolve and adapt to that. What about Apple? Well, Apple recently just came out with their new iPhones. They had their big event, and wasn't anything absolutely crazy, but every single year, and especially this year, they've been refining their camera technology. And with this new one, it is so good that their camera can record in, I think, like Dolby Vision, which it's like the only camera that can record and then edit on device in Dolby Vision. It's got, it records in HDR, which is high dynamic range. It shows like different, actual brightness rather than just different in colors. And so their camera technology it's got optical image stabilization as well. It's so good that you can actually make like real movies with it, like where you'd get tricked into thinking, hey, this was filmed on really expensive, Hollywood level equipment. You can do close to that with just an iPhone now. And what this is doing is democratizing the ability to create entertainment and to create content. 20 years ago, if you wanted to make a movie, it would have cost you, tens of millions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars, depending on the type of production. But today, a couple students with a couple iPhones can do it themselves without any equipment other than their iPhone. And so this is quickly pushing forward the development of a decentralized and thin, long-tailed market where you have material that, each one of these things might only be made for a small segment of people, but it's going to, number one, it's going to accelerate the demise of the traditional model where you go, spend a couple $100 million on a big budget for, CGI and all these, big camera equipments and big actors, because that's the old model. That's the fat tail, and that's a couple products that kind of mostly appeal to most people. But as we move forward with this, people are going to be able to tailor their exact precise wants, and you're going to have a much larger number of choices that have a much lower marginal cost of production and storage that will allow people to, it produces an actual business model for a ton of different channels or a ton of different producers or a ton of different forms of content. And so yes, Disney is moving this way. It looks like they're trying to evolve from, the old model to the new model. Other companies and channel like YouTube is, built on that really. This is why social media is really it is a threat to the traditional entertainment industry, because ultimately everybody's just competing for your time. Even me, right? Like, I'm not competing with, Mark Moss or George Gammon or Peter Schiff on YouTube. What I'm really competing for is your time. I'm competing against your wife or your husband, your kids. I'm competing against Netflix. I'm competing against dinner or work, right? So like everybody out there that's producing content now is competing just for time. And so this is a push. This is, this is really democratizing the technology, is bringing the ability for life to turn much more into a thin tail rather than, a fat tail. Now, this is a completely separate subject, but this is why deflation is such a good force, that deflation is actually healthy moving forward. When things get cheaper, ultimately it's cheaper for somebody to make a decent movie today than it was 10 or 20 years ago by just using an iPhone. It's good that happens, because yes, there's creative destruction that comes along with that there's going to be some job loss, and there's going to be some big devastation, some wealth lost from some of the big actors, big movie companies, whatever. Ultimately though, that's going to be really good for society, because that democratizes it, decentralizes it, and empowers people to be able to create their own small little universes where they can run small businesses, and it's not just absorbed by a few giants. So I expect to see a lot more of this, and especially since, technology equipment companies like Apple are producing products that make it easier for more and more people to do a lot of these things that used to need a much larger investment up front. It will continue, and in ways other than just entertainment. Obviously, that's an iPhone is able to do a lot of things other than just film cool movies. You can do a lot of things on an iPhone that you couldn't have done without a supercomputer 10 or 20 years ago, right? And so it's going to continue to accelerate how individuals can empower themselves and create small businesses for themselves and take market share from the fat tail into the long tail. And especially with shifts like this coming from large legacy companies like Disney saying, hey, we recognize this is the direction of the future. We're not at the tail end of this. We're at the beginning. So I know this was a little bit of a different video than I normally do, but ultimately I think it speaks volumes about a long-term future on how technology and decentralization and deflation and the internet will change the investing and the wealth creation and the business landscape and strategies. As always, I really appreciate you guys. You're the best. Have a great day.